Ben Shapiro is getting into it with Tucker Carlson. Shapiro responds to Carlson's moral equivalency struggle session here, and I'll play a little bit from Ben for you guys.
And Tucker, by the way, then continued along these lines. He did an interview with Vivek Ramaswamy, and he likened what just happened in Israel, the kidnapping of women and their rape. I mean, he's showing video of this happening, like as he's talking about this. He compared that to drug overdose deaths in the United States. Now, I believe we should fully care about the 100,000 drug overdose deaths that happen in the United States. These are two completely different issues. To go this far afield to link the issues, the only reason you're doing this is because you wish to downplay the atrocity that just happened in Israel. You're not upplaying the atrocity of what's happening on America's streets. Those are two different types of atrocities. People who are addicted to fentanyl, sticking needles in their arms and overdosing is a moral blight. It is a moral atrocity and a moral evil for people to kidnap women, rape them, and drag them back to the Gaza border. Those are not the same thing.
So, oh man, this is interesting. Saying that Tucker is trying to downplay the atrocities of what happened. That's a bold statement from Tucker. Let me play a little bit here from Ben. From Ben, sorry. Let me play a little bit from Tucker here.
I got to say, you mentioned moral outrage, and I thought the videos from southern Israel were morally outrageous, and I was offended by them and saddened by them. Anyone who saw them, I think, was. But you don't have to look far in the United States for moral outrages also on video. And there's not a city in this country, not just the big cities, but cities of 10,000 people. I was in one yesterday that doesn't have some constellation of drug-addicted young people living outside. We call them the homeless. They're drug addicts. And they're addicted to drugs that were imported across an open border, allowed by the Biden administration. And they're dying, more than 100,000 a year. Now, you could call it genocide, you can call it whatever you want, but it's the death of over 100,000 Americans a year and the living death of millions more who are living outside.
So this is interesting because Tucker's talking about 100,000 young people dying from these failed policies. Ben's making it seem like he's just comparing drug overdoses in general to what we just saw happen in Israel. I'm curious what you guys think. Whose team are you on? Team Tucker or Team Shapiro?
Well, obviously. Hey, here's Ben Shapiro putting a muzzle in someone's back because he's not crying hard enough about, Ben's number one issue, I assume. It's like, what is... Tucker's being very consistent. He's extremely nationalistic, populist, and he's making a point of, yes, we're all horrified by these images, but, I'm focused on my country. I mean, it's very true to who he is. I mean, he's not saying this is outrageous or anything. Why Ben's upset that Tucker's not angry enough? I think we're all pretty angry about it. I mean, that's why he had 30 minutes of his show dedicated to it with Vivek. Mm-hmm. And he wants to say, let's not forget what's happening in our own country. Where's the outrage here? I wish we were all as outraged about what's happening in our country as we are about what's happening in Israel right now. Mm-hmm. Seems to be what he was getting at.
Or Ukraine.
But that's not good enough for Ben Shapiro, apparently.
Or Ukraine. When we were all putting up the flags in Ukraine, I wish that we cared as much about what was happening to the people in Appalachia when they were being given opioids in mass and then being made fun of in private emails. I mean, I am not saying that these things are even comparable. I think both parties are maybe making a weird comparison, but there is definitely tragedy in America, and it is good to acknowledge that we don't whip ourselves into the frenzy that we have.
100,000 dead over this stuff
a year.
Yeah, I mean that's like I said, Ben is saying a person ODing on heroin is a moral blight, but it's an atrocity to kidnap, rape women, and drag them to the Gaza border. Okay, well Tucker said 100,000 dead, so we can talk about, like, I absolutely agree. In the sense of what Ben is saying, that yes, beating, raping women and kidnapping them and dragging them to the Gaza border is a moral atrocity well beyond someone overdosing. But Tucker saying 100,000 people overdosing, I think gets to the point of something very serious here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Poisoning an entire society.
Poisoning an entire society, right. Yeah, a different kind of attack.
But here's the other thing I'll add to this too. It's like, there's a video, I don't know if there was a video, there's a story out of Philly where a woman was raped on a train in front of a bunch of people. I think they filmed it.
Oh, yeah. Uh-huh.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so women are being beaten, raped, and kidnapped all the time in the United States because of the crime and because of the policies of these soft on crime Democrats. These policies are resulting in criminals being released. And then we just had that woman in Baltimore who was presumably raped and murdered on her roof, this tech CEO. Now you've got the guy in New York, Ryan Carlson, I think his name was, who was stabbed and killed. So, look, I can understand organized actions by Hamas into civilian areas is an atrocity. But I think Tucker's making a relevant point. He maybe could have articulated a little bit better if he wanted to. But he mentioned 100,000 deaths.
That's what you would call derailing what Tucker did. He derailed the conversation into another direction that he wanted
that's
to.
called that's called the segue.
He took them into a tangent. Yes, a tangential segue. So we lost.
It's his show.
But does Ben not watch Tucker Carlson? It would become so out of character if Tucker Carlson came on and started like, "We need to go to war, and this is the worst thing that's ever happened in the history of mankind." If it were about another country, you know.
This is the other thing. This is Tucker Carlson doing a segue. Where in a conversation, personally, you'll say, yes, I do understand that you like the color blue. Something else that's blue is the sky. Yes. Have you noticed it in the sky?
I particularly...
we do it all the time on this show.
I do it particularly. I do free association where if you're talking about a color, I might mention something else that's the same color. And you're like, that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about this thing.
That's derailing. Segues are different.
You're derailing me right now. Anyway, we're joking.
Segues are when we will talk for 15 or 20 minutes. And then we'll be talking about fake news, and I'll say, speaking of fake news, we have this article. We segue on by saying,
it's as if they caught the end of his segment on the attack, and then the beginning of his segment on the drug overdoses.
And he's trying to shift the conversation from Israel into American issues by saying, these things are really, really bad. We have some things that we're really concerned about here in the United States too. Normal segue
because he has a presidential candidate on,
right?
And he spent the last 20 minutes talking.
I look, man, I like Ben, and I respect his anger, frustration.
He's probably really scared. He probably has a lot of friends over there.
I mean, absolutely. His family and
Wasn't
friends.
he
It's
there
terrifying.
when it was happening?
He was there?
I don't remember. I could have misread a tweet online.
Oh, I don't know.
But
I'm saying
Jeremy Boeing put up this thing being like, Ben is safe. He's just observing the holiday, so he's not on social
well,
media.
good.
I could be totally off on this. Nobody.
I completely respect Ben's emotional state. He's highly agitated. I don't mean that to be mean. I mean he's clearly. This is affecting his family, probably his friends.
Definitely.
I'm sure that he may know people who are victimized, injured, maybe even killed. But I just want to say, on top of all that, cooler heads prevail, and now's the time to be like criticizing Tucker Carlson for doing a segue, and maybe, if Ben had approached it more calmly, being like, Tucker, you could do a better job, please. I think it would have landed better. But again, I can understand why Ben's upset. I'm not trying to be a dick.
Yeah, apparently he left just before it happened, just so you know.
Yeah.
Wow.
Just before.
And he wasn't on the internet either because they were observing Sabbath. So.
Yep, exactly.
Do you think it would be a good time to bring like Israeli scholars and or I guess to say Jewish scholars and Muslim scholars together for a conference?
They do that all the time.
Is it good to do right now, or is it?
We had Max talking about it, and it's just like it's never enough.
Yeah.
It's just
maybe if we do it, we could publicize it to another. It's like a new crowd.
Culture war episode. We get an imam and a rabbi and a priest.
We could.
That would be epic.
It'd be super really interesting. The thing is, though, like those are good, and it's good when people who are expert in their field, they're studying their religion, whatever. It's good for them to talk about things, but you have to remember the people on the ground are making decisions to participate in either side of this or not, and so. Someone having sort of like an elite group of scholars having a conversation doesn't mean that it's going to affect the hearts and minds of the people that are actually living in the realities of both of these countries right now.
I'm most concerned about the kids that are 9. They're going to be 22 in 11, 12, 13 years and remember this. Like the kids in 2009 whose sisters were blown up, they're all in their early 20s and they're ready to fight. I'm talking about like the Palestinians that were there during the Israeli attack in 2009 or whatever you want to call it. So in those situations, maybe if we have conversations early now and these 11, 12-year-olds that have lost their family members have something to listen to, then maybe that'll help them think properly over the next couple decades. Well, that's like the best I can do is just talking on a microphone other than going to Gaza, which I want to do too.
Yeah, I think that it's not wrong to want to have conversation. I just mean that it's easy for us who don't live in the middle of these countries to say, well, if we just talk about it more, then maybe we'll be able to reach an agreement. And I don't live with the cultural and religious complicated feelings that come with both of these places. I live in America and I'm Christian. So some of the things that go on are things that would be very difficult for me to understand. I don't know that we are in a position to offer a solution because, like all conflict and war in history, it's so deeply complicated and it's not just like one thing happened and suddenly they're fighting. This is a very layered, complicated, contentious relationship that has hit a very serious breaking point and resulted in very serious violence.
Yeah. It's like it's been 1,000 years. It's not like it's just going to go away tomorrow. That's one thing that we can say for sure. It's not going to just end because some people discuss some things and someone viewed them as being there. Because even within Islam, they have different opinions as to who leads like the spiritual successor of Muhammad on earth. So it's not going to be that easy. I know what you're saying and I get it. It's noble, but outside of a culture war episode, I don't know.
I want to do a new show maybe every Tuesday.
The religious show
1 to 2 to 3 hours where we fly in religious experts. It could be anybody, but if you guys support that in the audience, give me a 5 in the chat because I've been thinking about it a lot, and I don't think wasting time makes any sense anymore.
But I mean, the entire region only functions with strong men in power. Look what happened when they took out Gaddafi. I mean, there are such things as cultures that really only understand force and power.
Yeah, it's true.
I mean, Russia's a culture that only understands force and power.
And I think
they want a strong man.
I think that's really hard for us to understand.
If you say like, yeah, it's hard for us to understand, because we're like, well, let's just talk about it.
Yep.
We have local cops.
Yeah.
We've got this local protective bubble that we all live in, so it doesn't really matter if your president's an idiot sometimes.
Right, yeah, exactly.
But it's not true. It does matter on the geopolitical stage, just doesn't really matter as much domestically.
Yeah.
Whereas in Russia, if you're president, or in Chile, I don't know if do the Russians have local cops or is it federales all across the federation?
I don't remember exactly. I remember that. I'm pretty sure it's Federation cops.
Yeah,
I think so.
it might.
Yeah, so if the president's
Federation cops.
I want to ask you a question about Tucker really quickly. Were you, did you see a shift in his style? Because you observed him pretty closely from when he left Fox and now that he's doing his own thing.
Well, he's still an employee of Fox News, so he's under constraints about what he's able to do.
But just the style of his interviews.
Style of his interviews? I think he's, I mean, it's a different show now because it's long form. I guess it's more similar to that Tucker Carlson Today Show. I think that he's probably, I think probably the lack of structure is probably affecting him a little bit. I think
positively or negatively?
I think he's just probably getting used to it because he's worked at like a jobby job for 100 years in cable news, I think that the kind of freedom and lack of structure is maybe...
Is this something you kind of go into in his book, Tucker's time in media?
Yeah, I mean, most of the book is, it's, his birth, well, not even his childhood, his father's childhood, well before that, up until the book ends 2 weeks after he was taken off the air, and he's sort of still dazed by it and going through it.
How'd you meet him?
I was a regular on his show. I was first, actually, when I came out conservative, which was in a piece in the New York Post.
Came out conservative.
Yeah, when I came out conservative. That was a headline. I'm a gay New Yorker and I'm coming out conservative, which I thought was so
and
funny.
that coming out might have been harder. I don't actually know.
Oh, it was. It was much harder. Way harder than coming out 15 in the middle of the country as gay.
Hear you, man.
But that was February 2017, and he had me on the show because of that article, which went viral, which I had no idea it would.
Had you been writing biographies before that?
I'd written magazine profiles, tons of those, but not. This is my first biography.
How long did it take to write it?
This book was a little over a year.
Were you like in constant contact with Tucker as you were writing it?
Yeah, I was. Yeah, he was. I tried not to bother him. I bothered him as little as possible to try to respect his time. But I spent tons of time with him at his home and stayed in his home by his insistence. And
so, would you go interview him, take a bunch of notes, then leave, go write as much as you could, and then come back and hit him up again, kind of thing?
I tried to get it done in like chunks. So I would come hang out for a few days at a time, have my recorder going the whole time, and just kind of be there, and then get home, transcribe it all, go through it. Because I'd already done, there's a lot more, when you're writing about someone's career and all that, there's so much more you're already working on there's a lot of history there, there's a lot of words out there,
research,
tons of that, yeah.
Did you find that it changed you, learning about someone else and writing someone else's biography?
It did, yeah. I think with him particularly and his wife Susie, it made me, not to sound corny, but it made me chill out a bit. It made me kind of remember what was important in life.
What do you mean?
Just because he has a very, he is not an egomaniac. He's not a jerk. He's a really sort of warm and interesting person. He has a very balanced life. He makes sure he can see the stars every night, things like that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I've been talking a lot about that. He's very into nature, and he has a really lovely wife and lovely family. And so it was sort of one of those like, yeah, I need to remember what's important. It's not what's happening in the news. He's someone who very much knows that what's happening in the news is not the most important thing in the world.
I think that's
that's ironic, him being at the time as he was number one on Fox. When I was doing most of this research.
Yeah, I find myself wondering about that with America. I mean, all of the world, but definitely America's workaholic culture.
Yeah,
you see people, especially women, delay having children or getting married because they think, oh, my career needs to come first. I need to get to a certain level. And we know ultimately, you can always be more successful. You can always be working for something more. Whereas I've quoted this a couple times. It was The Guardian, I think, published this story interviewing men who hadn't had children. And they just kept saying, oh, I thought it would happen. So you have these two forces saying, I didn't put my eye on this thing that ultimately makes life sort of have a meaning that you can't just get from dollars and cents or promotions at work.
Yeah, that was something I discovered, is that he's so much more interested in the bigger questions of morality, family, faith, beauty than he is in politics per se.
Yeah.
Which are far more interesting conversations.
And they're the reason we're supposed to have politics in the first place, to uphold our morality.
And I think a part of his success was he's the only person that could speak on those things in mainstream media. Number one, because he actually believed them and he wrote all those monologues himself. But, he could do a segment about architecture. Like Sean Hannity can't do a segment on architecture. He doesn't care about architecture, And also, as you brought up, starting families, how young women get screwed by feminism and all these other lies that they've been told, and young men as well, which people don't talk about a lot, which he certainly does.
Yeah.
Thanks for watching this clip from the Timcast IRL podcast. Hang out with us live Monday through Friday at 8 p.m. and become a member over at timcast.com for uncensored, members-only shows exclusive. Thanks for hanging out, and we'll see you all next time.